Good afternoon. I am Dr. Aaron Willis, and I'm going to be leading a tour today of some of our 9/11 resources that are embedded in Active Classroom. This is a recorded session, so I wanted you to all be aware of that. We're going to try and go through and give you an idea about what resources you can find, and then I'm going to highlight 3 of 7 lessons in order to give you a little bit of a flavor about how you might use those and what the content is behind them. So the first place we'd start is with our new interface and going directly to the search screen, and then I've gone to the advanced search area here and selected from the series title menu, which is just below the era and theme, and came here to the September 11th education program. When I run that search, it takes me through and it gives me all of the resources here, a number of different lessons that are available that take advantage of our September 11th education content. Okay, so you get an idea of these are all lessons that are available. This one for honoring heroes scales down a little bit to the upper elementary grades. Some of the other ones like civic action and the role of government or U.S. and national security are going to scale up towards the high school levels. So you'll find what suits you. But I wanted to review 3 lessons in particular today that I thought could work well anywhere from the upper elementary through middle school and high school. So they give us a lot of flexibility in terms of what we might be able to see. The first place I want to start is with this one, the September 11th Education Program Remembrance presentation. The Remembrance presentation is a really easy way to have something creative, interesting, and thought-provoking to share with your students on 9/11. We're now recognizing that most of our students weren't even born or were merely infants at the time of 9/11 and may not really, they've heard of it before, but they may not realize all of the nuances or even the history of what led up to it. This Remembrance presentation is a 12-minute video that's accompanied by discussion questions. Within those 12 minutes, we work with you, we interview people, and it tells the story of 9/11. What happened, how did it happen, who was involved, but it really tells it from the point of view of interviews with the people that were affected, whether they were rescuers rescuing people, survivors escaping from the towers, or relatives of loved ones who deceased as part of the attack. And it includes both a reference to, you can see here, Pennsylvania, as well as New York, as well as Virginia. So within 12 minutes, it gives the students a really good overview, and it tells it from the perspective of people who were involved. The discussion questions encourage students to think about what they're hearing, and the discussion questions go from very general things like 20, 50, or 100 years from now, how do you think events of a September 11th will be understood as part of the context of United States history or world history? What other events have had a similar impact on history? How would you explain 9/11 today to somebody who was born before September 12th, 2001? So, or born on that, the day after, for example. So these all get at questions in order to get the students to think. As we go on, the questions get a little bit more personal. Here, one of the mother of a firefighter who was killed adds this: they were civilians, innocent people. Is there a meaningful difference between mass murder of civilians and the death of soldiers in a military action? What is the difference? Anthony Gardner observes, sometimes there aren't goodbyes. How can you say goodbye to a lost loved one when you actually can't say goodbye? So we have questions here that are both sort of getting students to think about history, but also getting students to think about what would it mean to have been personally affected by this tragedy. And we think that you don't have to take your students through all of these questions, and you certainly can choose which ones to engage your students with. But this is a great thing to do. You can do it in a single class period, a 12-minute video, and then a 30, 40-minute discussion around that to see how students respond to that. Another activity I'd like to talk about is this one we call the historian's craft, creating timelines and using personal narratives. This one's really nice because it gets at a lot of the fundamental skills that students need in order to understand what is it that historians do. Historians work with primary sources and sometimes aggregate those sources together and put them in the context of what happened first, what happened next, what happened after that. And what we start to recognize is that the timelines that we create, in effect, create their own impression about what happened. And so in this activity, we ask students to look at 3 different timelines, 3 different durations, 3 different media for presenting timelines, and to think about what it means to be able to present a timeline in these different formats. So one of the first things you get into here is the teacher's guide. We encourage you to download the teacher's guide whenever you get into one of the lessons in Active Classroom. It's usually right up there in the top corner as a downloadable PDF. This one's very nicely laid out. You have a clear overview. You've got your goals for your students, the clear objectives for the students. It also takes you through the time that you might want to invest in this, some background information, all the lesson components. So definitely take a look at the teacher's guides. They're laid out and easy to digest and to get an idea of where you want to go. This lesson begins with vocabulary, so students can understand the context of what they're going to be looking at. And then we go in and we begin to look at, what, as I mentioned, 3 separate types of timelines. So here's a timeline that was created through personal narratives, and it includes, I think, 3 different videos, anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes up to about 8 minutes as we walk through the day's events heard by the people who were affected by it. So that's one type of timeline. Another timeline that they'll see is the timeline in the 9/11 Commission report, which basically gives a timeline almost minute by minute during the day from when the planes took off until when they were crashed into the towers in New York. So that gives you a different impression about what's gone on through the day. And then finally, in this lesson of a long-term timeline, students look at a timeline that goes over 22 years and stretches back into the 1990s in order to understand deeper and deeper roots to the conflict. And of course, the question you need to ask is, how far do you need to go back to create a timeline to understand what really happened on that day? Do you need to go back even further than 22 years? Do you need to go back to the founding of extremist Muslim groups in the early 20th century? Do you need to go back to the founding of Islam itself? Do you need to go back even further than that? What is the context in which this makes sense? And that I don't have an answer for, but we hope that you will engage your students in that type of critical thinking and decision making. Another component of this lesson is the idea of oral histories. Students will view videos of people talking about what happened on that day, but then they have the opportunity with this reproducible handout to actually go out and interview somebody who was alive that day. So this is a great way for students to take this home, for them to interview a parent, an aunt, an uncle, a grandparent, anybody who was alive at the time, and they've got questions that'll scaffold them through in terms of creating their own interview. So this is wonderful because it gets at part of what historians do, which are interviewing people and trying to fill in the details and gathering evidence. And this becomes both a good way for the students to get a story, to get a deeper understanding, once again also to get a personal story about 9/11. Not just the abstract, this is what happened and this is how it happened, but to hear from somebody that they know. Where were they on that day? What did they experience? What did they think? What did they feel? What were they concerned about? And all of these questions come across. So we've really got a nice, well-rounded lesson here. Now you saw there's 3 different components. There's the timelines component, as well as this oral history component, and there's the looking at the different types of timelines and comparing them. So you don't have to do all of these. You may choose just to have your students do this interview component. You just go in and download this. Maybe they've done the Remembrance presentation. You don't have to use everything. Those are all options that are available to you. Okay, one of the last lessons that I wanted to just share with you quickly is this one that we have on visualizing 9/11, photographs and words. And once again, going towards the historian's craft, and the idea is that historians work with primary sources, and we're trying to teach students how to analyze primary sources. So here they're going to get primary sources in two forms. One, they're going to get videos of actual people involved in that day, and here's Brian Clark, who's a survivor who I think was on the 83rd floor of the South Tower and descended all the way down and was able to escape with only minor injuries, and he talks a little bit about what that experience was like. So students are able to gather information from that as well. And then they analyze photographs, and they're able to compare the difference between what it means to gather information from a video or from first-person narratives, and then what it means to go in and look at primary source documents, these photographs from the period. And we give them some help here, and we ask them to think about, with each of the photographs that they're looking about, what is there from a factual point of view? What can they identify that's there, that's clearly, obviously stated, this is what's there? The camera angle, what's in the photograph, what the action that's being depicted. And then the second part is to ask them, well, what is the emotional component of this photograph? How is that evoked? Okay, what are signs and symbols that are there in the photograph? Was there a camera angle used to determine a sort of a point of view or to set a subject? Do you see emotions either expressed by the people in the photograph, or does the photograph inspire emotions in you? These types of questions help the students, that gives them a way in which to interpret and understand the photographs, and to understand that there are multiple levels. It's not just looking at a photograph and thinking about what's there, but also about how it makes you feel and how that might be important. So here's some samples of some of the photographs that are included there, where the students might be making both denotative and connotative observations. I think there's about 12 different photos that are associated with this one lesson, and I've just shown you a few here today. Okay, as I mentioned, we've got some other lessons that I'm not going to go over today, but I'm encouraging you, if you work in with a government class, this idea of civic action and the role of government talks about what advocates did, loved ones of people who perished in 9/11, and how they took it to protest, to writing Congress, and to trying to influence government action in the aftermath of 9/11. We have other things that are more reflective for students. What would they do if they were designing a 9/11 memorial? How would they honor heroes? What was involved in the recovery process? As I mentioned before, U.S. national security and some of the implications there, as well as an understanding. There's a mapping activity where students are placing pins and identifying different aspects of where terrorist attacks have taken place around the world that affected the United States. And then they see 9/11 and the attack on New York and Virginia and Pennsylvania in that context. And then, of course, this one that we were just looking at on visualizing 9/11. So that's pretty much what I wanted to just give you a taste of today. I'm going to open it up now to any questions that people may have. And so let's go there.